Hello and welcome to today's Podcast Plus, where we bring you insight for best practice in bite-sized chunks. On the back of a number of hot topic podcasts we've done very recently, here's another one: Coping Strategies for Law Firms During the COVID-19 Pandemic. This is part one. Nobody would doubt that this is a particularly tricky time and a tricky subject for us all. Let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Neil Partridge, I'm the Operations Director at PDA Legal, and I'm delighted to be joined today by our guest speaker, Mr. Richard Hull, who is the Managing Partner at Thomas Horton LLP. Good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon, Neil.
Thanks very much for joining us. So let me take you through what we're going to cover today. This is a big area, and as I've mentioned, this is part one. We also have a part two. In a nutshell, in part one today, we're going to cover two general areas: business management, in terms of business continuity and actually making this work remotely, if you like, and during the pandemic, but also protecting information security, data protection, confidentiality, which is at the forefront of all of our minds. In other words, today's podcast is around business management and regulatory aspects, if you like. Without further ado, I'm going to, if I may, Richard, go straight to my first question for you.
Okay.
I was going to ask the question here, in overview: how has the firm approached dealing with the current business challenges, but also could you just give us a brief overview as to the type of firm that you are, who your staff are, and what it is that you do as a legal practice?
Yes, of course. So I would consider that we are a typical regional law firm, 3 offices, turnover of under £5 million per annum. We've got 5 partners, employ around 70 staff, and our work is a mixture of perhaps 50% private client work, with the remaining 50% coming from commercial support, civil litigation, and legal aid, care and crime. So a proper high street practice, as it were. We have 3 offices throughout Worcestershire. Yeah, so I think we're perhaps well placed to be encountering the problems that many other law firms are encountering at present. In relation to how we've approached dealing with current business challenges, I've put some thought into this, and I suppose it's a good time for us to be talking about it because we are in what I consider to be our adaptation phase. I think that the first maybe fortnight can only be considered to have been a firefight.
Yes.
When decisions were having to be made as to staff, we were all trying to come to terms with a very new lifestyle. We had personal concerns about our own health and welfare, concerns about staff, but also business concerns. How do we keep a business afloat when the future was so uncertain? After 2 to 3 weeks, I would say that we moved into what I call a consolidation phase. We realised that this is the new norm, and we have to make more medium-term decisions, thinking of additional staff to be furloughed, regrettably thinking of other staff who were to be dismissed or made redundant. And now I think we're moving into an adaptation phase. It's clear that this is going to be a long-term challenge for any business, yet alone a law firm. And so it's adapting our business model to make the most of the opportunities that present themselves. And the opportunities are wide, are very varied. So, for example, in terms of probate administration, we've had to draft lawyers into that department because we are seeing a significant hike in instructions for probate administration. 1, because of coronavirus deaths, and we have encountered some of those. 2, because there's just a natural process of people dying from ordinary illnesses, as it were. But then also it is clear that those involved with the administration of a loved one's estate are not in a position to or willing to undertake the administration of the estate in which maybe they ordinarily would if we weren't facing a lockdown.
Yes.
So we've found that many more executors are turning to us to administer an estate. And so that is a growth area. There are opportunities here. Contrast that with crime and care, legal aid, court work. that's been pretty much suspended. But it's in suspended animation. We know those cases continue to exist. We know those cases will need to be resolved, and we know that the courts are working on strategies to enable the engine to be started back up, as it were.
Sure.
But importantly, those cases continue to exist. They're in our cabinets and they're ready to go as soon as the courts are. The third type of work, the obvious one, is conveyancing. Now, that's different because that's not in suspended animation. We don't know where that is. And what I mean by that is that there are going to be some transactions that when the lockdown is eased and when people return to work, I'm sure that those transactions will follow the course that they were already intended.
Yes.
But I also fear and anticipate that there will be a number of our transactions that will fail and that will become abortive because people will lose their jobs, circumstances will have changed, they will not be as confident in the economy. So that is a significant concern for us because it accounts for 25% of our fee income. And I foresee a significant downturn in conveyancing work. But we need to be live to that because we need to keep the most capable members of staff on our books, as it were, whilst also recognising that some difficult decisions may be needed in respect of other members of staff. So that's how we're dealing with current business challenges, a wide variety of decisions to be made. And as I say, we're now really into that adaptation model of working out how to adapt, looking forward to the next year or so.
So it sounds reasonable to suggest, Richard, that your general approach has been one of adaptation for survival, as well as looking ahead, if you like, at the opportunities and threats which may well manifest in the coming months and maybe years ahead?
Yes, I like to say quite frequently that everything should be approached with balance, with a balanced view. I don't think we can see this as a time of crisis where there are opportunities. I think there are some opportunities, but I would urge caution on anyone who fears the lockdown and has shut the door, furloughed all their staff and gone home. There has to be a balance struck between trying to maintain a business, being cautious, but also being live to opportunities that present themselves. What's been really interesting for me is seeing how the crisis management, the firefight, as it were, has led to much better practices in terms of business management. It will probably lead into the next question: how am I managing the business? And what I mean by that is we have undertaken a daily review of our office account balance and of the net contribution to the firm of those who are working. And what I mean by net contribution is what bills are being raised by any particular fee earner on each day and how much their work in progress is increased or decreased each day, a daily contribution. That's something that we did in the early days to identify candidates for furlough or redundancy. But what it's shown me over the last month is that actually it's a really good barometer of how the firm is performing. It's a course of action that I intend to undertake once the crisis is over. Just that daily review. It doesn't take a long time. We have each fee earner listed in a table, but you can just look at the top line figures of WIP movement and bills for the day. And if there's something there that causes concern or gives reason for positivity, you can drill down into the detail and spend a bit more time. But it's been an interesting process to be undertaken that I think we've learned from and will take moving forward.
It's a really interesting perspective. As you say, it's funny what comes out of crisis, doesn't it, sometimes? The tools that you can use again in the future. In fact, you have led us quite nicely onto the next question I've got for you, Richard, which is on the very subject of business continuity itself. How are you achieving that?
It's perhaps telling that ordinarily probably 50% of my time is undertaken in fee earning, and the other 50% of my time is undertaken with management. I've got good partners who support me. I'm now going to get about 95% management time because everything has to be monitored. If you're going to this crisis, everything has to be monitored. Credit control. Are people paying your bills? Are fee earners getting money on account? Are you paying the bills that you need to pay, or are you not? There has to be a commercial decision as to who you pay and who you don't pay, and where you can get better terms in terms of default. So there are a number of areas where I am looking every day at what is coming in and what is going out. And that's the core of it in terms of business continuity, in managing the business side of a professional entity. We'll come on, I assume, to the professional continuity and maintaining standards and maintaining compliance. But in terms of business continuity, I would suggest that whoever's responsible for the business continuity of the firm is looking at all of those figures every single day, maybe even more than once a day. What are fee earners bringing in? What are they contributing? And what's going out?
So on a day-to-day basis, it's clearly you've been prioritising very heavily in some areas, in fact all areas. Have you come across anything that possibly you felt could wait?
We are watching the news every day with everybody else. That is the most significant challenge we face, is a lack of clarity. I appreciate the government's sentiment in not wanting to send confusing messages or confuse members of the public. But for business owners, it's very difficult to not know whether we will be locked down for another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month. And so we are undertaking cash flow forecasts. Now, I'm aware that some of the banks no longer require cash flow forecasts for the purposes of finance applications because they recognise it's impossible to forecast when the future is not known. But where I think the cash flow forecast has proven invaluable, because we had prepared as already, is to give you a benchmark. So we had envisaged 1/3 fee income from normal. We're higher than that. And so we are able to benchmark why we thought it would be 1/3 and then reflect upon why it's higher than 1/3.
Yes.
So you still need to keep those core business strategies in place to give you your benchmarking. So that's what I would say, really, to answer your question. That's what we're doing. We're benchmarking everything. And then, yes, there are some things that can wait, but not very many. The business is still busy. We have still got various people working from home, people working in the office. We've made changes. So we've closed 2 of our offices to move everything back to what we call the mothership, back to the head office.
Yes.
And so we've undertaken that. So I'm struggling to think of anything where we've thought, well, that can wait. There's very little that can wait at the minute.
And how are you keeping staff up to date with the management day-to-day of the firm?
So that's proven a challenge because we have staff. So we have around 15 to 20 staff in the office, and we have around 15 staff working at home, and the rest are furloughed. And those staff who've been furloughed have had their email access removed, and their emails have been diverted to the particular fee earner who has remained in continuous employment within the firm. And so what we've undertaken is a private Facebook page. So we are on Facebook as a firm, but we also have a separate private Facebook page that all members of staff, be it employed or furloughed, can access. And we provide updates on that Facebook page to keep them engaged, motivated, and in the tent, as it were.
Thank you very much. I know in the second podcast plus, we're actually going to be talking about things like supervision. But that was quite useful, quite innovative, the private pages idea. But let me move us on to the next question I have for you, Richard, which is, when you've been thinking around dealing with the LAA or with regulators or your insurer, what have been your considerations? What have you done to support dealing with them?
The nature of the communication that we have undertaken has been by email initially, supported by telephone calls, but always by email, to ensure that we have a clear, evidential link to the information that we've provided. So I have been had some good communication by email with our contract manager for the legal aid agency. I have to say he's proven very supportive. He understands why we have mothballed, want of a better expression, one of our offices, and it has been very supportive of our efforts and actually encouraged by the changes we are undertaking, because they want businesses to survive.
Of course.
They want people to continue to provide the work that they fund beyond this crisis. And I know, because I speak to a good deal of my colleagues, some of whom are exclusively legal aid practices, that the challenges they face are potentially insurmountable in terms of cash flow, funding. It may well be that they have cases like me that are in suspended animation, but that suspended animation cannot continue indefinitely. So that's the way that I've felt it appropriate. We've been in contact with our broker just to advise him in terms of our insurance as to what we are doing, how we are doing it. I've sent him a copy of our interim business plan to show that we have taken account of the changes, that we are undertaking appropriate checks and balances in respect of the work that those individuals are undertaking. And so that's all I would say is a good line of communication, but one that's capable of being evidenced.
Have the regulators or insurers or anybody else been able to provide any useful hints, tips, or points for consideration?
No. It's short. The insurers were very interesting. Our insurance renewal is March. So our renewal came at a very difficult time for us because we were furloughing our entire conveyancing department, and we wondered whether that would impact our premium at all. And the insurer was of the view that it would not. Because, of course, our renewal is based on historic performance and historic turnover levels. Yes. So they were disinterested in any efforts by us to mitigate our premium to reflect a lower level of business activity. So in terms of actually providing support and guidance and suggestions, I regret to say that no, we haven't received any particular positive assistance from any of those regulators as to steps that they think we should take. We're on our own, which is why I think it's more important than ever to record the decisions that we are making, so that if anything happens in the future, you can show as a business and as a professional why you've taken the decisions you've taken.
Thank you for the very sort of frank and candid response there. Another question for you, if I may then, because of course you are a Lexcel firm, and that means that for nearly 2 decades now ago, I believe, you started with Lexcel. You've had to have documented controls in place. Now, of course, data protection is one of those key controls, and confidentiality is, if you like, it's the heart of everything that a legal practice does. So what steps have you been taking to support the integrity of data protection and confidentiality in the extreme challenge of a lot of home working taking place?
It's a good question, because our practice, like I imagine a great many practices, had staff who undertook home working intermittently. We didn't have any particular permanence to any home workers. And so they were aware of the requirements. They've got their laptops. They understand the checks and balances that are there in respect of data protection. Where I think the challenge has come is that whereas we had members of staff who would historically maybe work 1 day a week from home, and their children would be at school and their wife or husband would be at work, now we have home workers who are at home with children, with loved ones, and they still have to operate in a manner that is confidential.
Yes.
So that's where Lexcel has proven to be a benefit. I mentioned a short time ago having matters documented, and we have amended our policies and procedures in respect of our IT policy, in respect of our money laundering policy, to enable the identification of clients via FaceTime and Skype, to ensure that staff have a clear remit in respect of their home working, to ensure that they understand that they must be working in a a private place, that they can't be overheard, that the files they're working on, if they have any hard copy files, are not capable of being accessed by members of their family. Now, everything I've just said is common sense to any lawyer, but where the challenge comes is evidencing that, evidencing that common sense approach. And that's where Lexcel has helped, I've got to be honest, because it gives us an area within our business, a folder. We do actually have still, although they're held electronically, we do still hold hard copy folders in each office of each policy, plan and procedure, so that we have got documented the advice that we've given to staff. And so it's evident, we can evidence it then if ever we're challenged upon the manner in which we've instructed our staff to work. So that's all I'd say. We all know what to do and how to do it. It's recording it that's a challenge.
Thank you for that. Have you, out of interest, had any data protection or confidentiality queries from the field, from staff? Has anybody raised anything and said, okay, Richard, how do we deal with this? How would you like us to deal with this?
No. Everybody seems to be very aware of the challenges, perhaps more aware even than normally, because whereas historically they might have said, well, I'm working from home tomorrow, and so didn't particularly address their mind to the issues. Now they are working at home 5 days a week. They are really committing themselves to making sure there is that quiet space, that they have the door shut, that they're keeping their files out of sight and matters like that. So we haven't actually. Maybe that's a reflection of the guidance. If you give staff clear guidance, invariably the people who are working from home are fee earners, most of them solicitors. So they understand their professional obligations and they understand the guidance, and they've been really good on the whole. I was going to say on the whole, but they all have. They've been really good.
Thank you very much. Richard, just before we end this part one of our Coping Strategies podcast, is there anything else you'd like to add on the sort of the business management and business continuity side?
My contact with professionals over the last few weeks has been varied. I speak to a great many friends who have grown up with, who work in a variety of different practices. And I suppose my only advice, for what it's worth, is to not approach this period with negativity. There are challenges for sure. There are opportunities, and majority of us can survive this if we are sufficiently focused on the core business strategies, on cash flow, on billing, on fee earning, on professional integrity. We can survive this, but it takes a great deal of focus, but without negativity. Negativity doesn't help. I've had negative moments. Don't rest assured, I've had my negative moments, but it doesn't help. So that's perhaps the only thing I would add. And speak to your colleagues, speak to other firms. I know that we're all generally in competition, but at this time of crisis, I think we should all be supporting each other and sharing ideas.
Richard, thank you very much. Wise words indeed. And in fact, I think we're going to be touching on, if you like, cultural aspects in the next podcast as well. But thank you again ever so much for your time today.
No, you're welcome.
Well, just as we come to leave you now, I'll just draw your attention to some more Podcast Plus sessions, some of which have already been recorded and which you can access immediately on the PDA Legal website. You're very welcome to get in touch with myself, Neil Partridge. My details there at the front and also on this slide here. But do take a moment and have a look at the podcast details here, and we look forward to you joining us again very soon. Thanks very much.